The words hit me harder than I expected. Clara, we're letting you go. Just like that. No warning. No compassion. I stood in front of Andrew Whitmore, the man who'd smiled at me through board meetings. The same man who'd said I was the backbone of the company. He wouldn't even meet my eyes. His fingers drummed lightly on the table, controlled, detached. Like firing me was just another meeting on his calendar. I remember my hand gripping the folder tighter. My mother's death certificate was still inside. I had taken 1 week. 1 week to bury her. To fold her clothes. To say goodbye. And for that, I was being fired. I couldn't breathe for a second. The air in the office felt stale, recycled through air vents and lies. I could hear the faint hum of the copier outside the door, the sound of my coworkers pretending not to listen. Andrew leaned back and said, "We need someone more committed. You've had a lot going on lately." A lot going on. That's what he called losing the only person who'd ever believed in me. I looked at him, that press suit, that polished arrogance, and I thought about how just 2 months ago, he'd been the one asking for my help adjusting to his new role as regional director. I'd trained him. I'd handed him the reins. And now he was cutting me loose like dead weight. I asked him one question. My voice barely made it out. "Andrew, are you serious?" He didn't answer. He just nodded toward the HR rep sitting in the corner, her lips tight, eyes down. She slid the envelope across the table like a guilty offering. Severance pay. My throat burned. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but my body went completely numb. "You can collect your things before lunch," he said softly. "I'll make sure security gives you privacy." Privacy. That was the word that broke me. Because I realized he was ashamed not of what he was doing, but of how it looked. When I walked out of that office, the entire floor went silent. I could feel every stare on me. Sympathy, curiosity, maybe relief that it wasn't them this time. I set my badge on my desk, unplugged my charger, and stuffed my few belongings into a cardboard box. My nameplate was still warm from my touch when I placed it inside. No one said a word. Except for one intern, a sweet girl named Lily, who whispered, "I'm so sorry, Clara." I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak. By the time I reached the elevator, I saw my reflection in the doors, eyes red, lips trembling, blouse wrinkled from the tension. I looked small. Smaller than I'd ever felt. But that version of me, the one standing there in silence, holding a box full of her broken years, she didn't die that day. She just went quiet. And started watching. My name is Clara Monroe. And this is the story of how the man who fired me for burying my mother lost everything he thought made him powerful. It didn't happen overnight. It happened piece by piece, the way rot spreads through wood, quiet at first, until it caves in on itself. See, Andrew Whitmore thought he was untouchable. The golden boy. The kind of man who got promoted not for his competence, but for how well he played the game. I wasn't naive. I knew how the world worked. I'd worked under men like him before. Charming, empty, ruthless. But this time was different. Because Andrew didn't just end my career. He made me start taking notes. The first few weeks were the hardest. I couldn't find sleep. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "Don't let people like that decide who you are, Clara." I spent nights sitting by her old piano, running my fingers along the keys she used to play. The apartment felt hollow without her humming. Every sound reminded me of loss, the clock ticking, the fridge buzzing, the city noise outside. But pain has a strange way of sharpening you. One morning, about a month after losing my job, I woke up to an email from Andrew. "You left a few files incomplete. Please review them remotely when you can. No, hope you're doing better." No apology. Just arrogance, as if I was still his assistant. That was the moment I knew. He hadn't taken everything from me. He'd just shown me where to aim. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and started building something else, something of my own. In the beginning, it was small. Just an idea, a whisper of what could be. I took consulting gigs. I used the skills Andrew never appreciated: financial forecasting, corporate Efficiency, data modeling. I'd always been good with numbers, but now I used the M like a weapon. People started to notice. One client turned into three. Three turned into seven. Within 6 months, I had my own roster. Small businesses, start-ups, struggling firms. They came to me desperate, and I turned them around quietly, efficiently. No one knew my name yet. But Andrew's company, his shiny regional empire, was starting to appear in conversations. Their numbers were slipping. Their board was restless. And the person they were looking for to fix things was me. I smiled the first time I saw his company's logo in my inbox. That's when I realized fate had a dark sense of humor. The first time I met Andrew Whitmore, he wasn't the man who fired me. He was the man who asked me how to turn on the projector. He just transferred from another branch, sharp suit, fresh confidence, and that smile. The kind that made everyone in the room think he was listening when he really wasn't. I was the operations lead back then. I'd been there for 6 years, built the company's internal systems from scratch. When Andrew arrived, my manager told me, show him the ropes. He's new, but ambitious. Ambitious was one word for it. Ruthless would have been better. He shadowed me for weeks, asking questions that didn't seem important at first. Who handled payroll, which clients brought the most revenue, who the board listened to. I thought he was just eager to learn. He wasn't learning. He was mapping. Andrew had this ability to make people feel seen. He'd laugh at the right time, praise someone's work in public, remember birthdays. It was charming, until you realized it was all calculated. He once told me, half joking, people aren't hard to manage, Clara. You just have to make them believe they owe you. At the time, I laughed. I didn't realize I'd just heard his entire philosophy on power. Months passed, and slowly, I began to notice the shifts. Ideas I'd pitched in meetings started coming out of Andrew's mouth. Reports I'd written suddenly had his name at the top. The board adored him, called him a visionary. And I let it happen. Because back then, I still believed hard work spoke louder than politics. But Andrew played a different game. The day he got promoted to regional director, he walked past my desk, paused, and said, couldn't have done it without you, Clara. Then he winked as if stealing my credit was some private joke between us. I smiled back. That's what women like me are taught to do. Smile. Endure. Keep your head down and your dignity intact. But the day my mother got sick, everything changed. She'd been battling heart failure quietly for months. I took time off to care for her unpaid, because the company couldn't accommodate extended leave. I didn't care. She was all I had. When she passed, I returned to work hollow, but determined. I remember walking in that Monday, clutching her rosary in my palm, ready to start over. Andrew was in my office. My office, with his feet on the desk. Hey, he said casually. I moved a few things around. Thought it'd be more efficient this way. He didn't even look up. That's when I knew I was already being replaced. From that moment, every interaction with him felt colder. The smiles were gone, replaced with condescension disguised as professionalism. He started excluding me from key meetings, reassigning my projects, making sure I was invisible. And I let him for a while. Because grief makes you small. It dulls your edges. Then came the final blow, the termination meeting. The one that ended the old Clara. But I remember, that night after packing my box, I sat in my car for hours, watching the office lights flicker off one by one. My tears had dried. There was only silence and the slow, cold realization that I had just been erased. Or so he thought. That night, I promised myself something. If he'd built his career by stepping on my shoulders, I'd build my empire by standing on his ruins. And I meant it. The weeks after my firing felt like drifting through fog. Days bled into nights, and nights into long, silent mornings where the only sound was the hum of my laptop. I wasn't looking for jobs, not yet. I was watching. See, when someone like Andrew Whitmore thinks he's won, he gets sloppy. He forgets the people who once kept the foundation steady. And in that arrogance is where cracks begin to show. A few months passed before I started hearing whispers. A client delayed payment. A vendor dropped their contract. Turnover quietly rising. Little things. But little things become fractures when ignored. I didn't celebrate. I took notes. My savings were thinning, but I had one thing left that Andrew didn't: perspective. I knew how his company worked, who made it run, and who secretly resented him. So, I started reaching out carefully. A late-night message to a former analyst. A coffee with a supplier who'd been underpaid. Every conversation gave me a thread, and I started weaving. By the third month, I was consulting independently, helping small firms streamline operations, rebuild trust, cut the excess. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was fixing broken systems while the one that had discarded me was beginning to fall apart. People liked my approach: quiet, efficient, no ego. They said I reminded them of how business used to feel before it became a stage for men like Andrew. One night, while reviewing reports, I came across a familiar logo: Whitmore & Co. My old company. They were listed under potential restructure. I stared at that name for a long time. Not with anger anymore, but with something colder. Focus. Because in that moment, I realized I didn't need revenge to destroy him. I just needed to be better at the game he thought he'd mastered. And I was. Growth has a sound. It isn't loud, it's steady. Like the rhythm of keys at midnight, or the quiet buzz of opportunity when the world is asleep. 6 months after I started consulting, my little operation had a name: Monroe Strategies. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Every client came through word of mouth, and every project carried a piece of the discipline I'd learned under Andrew Whitmore, discipline he never valued. The irony still made me smile. I worked out of my kitchen table, coffee always going cold beside the piles of contracts. There were days I doubted myself, when the money barely covered rent. But then I'd remember his voice: "We need someone more committed." And suddenly, I'd find the strength to keep going. By the end of the year, I'd hired 2 people, former coworkers who'd also left the company after Andrew's promotion. Both brilliant, both broken by the same machine that had discarded me. Together, we built something different. Transparent. Fair. Human. Our results spoke for themselves. Within a year, Monroe Strategies was being quietly mentioned in circles I never thought I'd reach. Mid-level firms. Private investors. Even whispers from old board members who were growing disillusioned with Andrew's empire. That's when I got the call. "Ms. Monroe," the voice said, "we'd like to discuss a potential acquisition project. The client's in trouble, and they need discretion." I agreed to meet. When I opened the brief the next morning, my heart skipped. Whitmore & Company. His name, his company right there in black and white. Their numbers were bleeding. Their contracts mismanaged. Investors restless. I sat back in my chair, staring at the page. It felt poetic, almost cruelly so. The universe had just handed me the first stone. I didn't say yes immediately. That surprised even me. For days, I stared at that proposal, wondering if accepting it meant becoming the very thing I despised. Revenge has a taste, sweet at first, then bitter if you drink too fast. But then I remembered the look on Andrew Whitmore's face the day he fired me. The practiced sympathy. The controlled cruelty. And I realized something. I wasn't out for vengeance. I was out for balance. So I said yes. Quietly. Professionally. The firm that reached out to me didn't know my history with Whitmore & Company. They only knew my reputation for cleaning up corporate disasters, efficiently, discreetly, permanently. By the time the papers were signed, I wasn't just consulting. I was in the perfect position to study the empire that once discarded me, from the inside out. The first day back inside that building felt like walking into a photograph I'd burned years ago. Same sterile hallways. Same recycled air. But everything was dimmer now. The confidence that once ruled the place was gone, replaced with whispers and exhaustion. Andrew wasn't there that day. He was traveling, according to the assistant who barely looked up from her screen. It didn't matter. His presence lingered in the space like the scent of an expensive cologne, strong, artificial, and fading. I kept my head down, observing, taking quiet notes. Departments misaligned. Morale broken. Systems outdated. It was almost poetic, watching the company rot from the inside, undone by the same shortcuts he'd once bragged about. At the end of the day, I stood by the glass wall overlooking the city and whispered to myself, "You built this house, Andrew. I'm just here to watch it crumble." Over the next few weeks, I became invisible again, the way I used to be. Only this time, it was on purpose. I moved through meetings quietly, fixing what I could, collecting what I needed. People trusted me fast. It's funny how humility looks like honesty to the desperate. The more I worked, the more patterns emerged: falsified reports, risky deals, internal conflicts disguised as creative disagreements. And at the center of it all, Andrew Whitmore. His charm had worn thin. The board didn't laugh at his jokes anymore. Investors whispered about mismanagement. He was slipping, but no one dared say it out loud. Except me, though only in my thoughts. Every night, I'd come home, pour myself a glass of wine, and review my notes. It wasn't revenge I saw forming on the page. It was evidence. The first time I saw him again, it was almost anticlimactic. A conference room. Fluorescent lights. The faint hum of the projector he once didn't know how to turn on. He walked in late, of course. Still confident. Still polished. But older now, stress clinging to him like shadow. For a moment, our eyes met. He froze. Just a fraction of a second, but I saw it: recognition, disbelief, maybe a trace of guilt. "Clara Monroe," he said finally, forcing a smile. "Didn't expect to see you again." "Life's strange that way," I replied evenly. "It tends to circle back." He laughed, nervous, shallow, and started the meeting like nothing happened. But every time I spoke, he shifted in his chair. Power had changed hands, and he could feel it. After that day, things moved fast. Andrew tried to reassert control, but the cracks were too deep. I presented to the board weekly, calm, confident, everything he used to be. They started calling me indispensable, the same word he'd once used for himself. He began making mistakes, desperate decisions, public blunders. And the more he tried to fix them, the worse they became. One night, after a long board session, he caught me in the hallway. "You think you're better than me now," he said. His voice wasn't angry, it was scared. I met his eyes and said quietly, "No, Andrew. I just learned from the best." He didn't respond. He just walked away, shoulders tense, as if the walls themselves were closing in. By the time winter came, Whitmore and Company was unrecognizable. Clients had fled. Investors were circling like vultures. And Andrew? He was unraveling slowly, beautifully, inevitably. I didn't sabotage him. I didn't need to. He'd built a kingdom on ego, and ego doesn't survive accountability. The night before the final board vote, I stood by my apartment window, city lights flickering below, and thought of my mother. Her hands on the piano. Her voice saying, "Don't let people like that decide who you are, Clara." I smiled. Because she was right. I hadn't let Andrew decide who I was. He'd only shown me who I was meant to become. The boardroom that winter felt colder than usual. Not because of the air conditioning, but because power was shifting quietly and irrevocably. Andrew Whitmore walked in late again, tie loosened, eyes tired. He'd aged months and weeks. His voice still carried authority, but not conviction. I sat 3 seats away, my notes organized, my tone even. When I spoke, people listened. When he spoke, they hesitated. And I saw it, the flicker of fear behind his eyes. He knew. Somewhere deep down, he knew the balance had changed. The man who'd once dismissed me with a severance check was now fighting to keep his own seat at the table. By the time the meeting ended, the board had requested an internal review of his leadership. Andrew tried to smile, pretending not to notice the betrayal in the room. But I noticed everything. As he left, our eyes met across the table. He knew I was watching. And I think, for the first time, he wondered if this was karma or calculation. The review took months. Numbers. Reports. Interviews. I wasn't the one pulling the strings. I didn't have to. I just made sure the truth had room to breathe. Old employees came forward quietly. Clients revealed inconsistencies. Investors began shifting funds to other ventures. Whitmore and Company was bleeding, and the smell of weakness draws sharks faster than blood ever could. Andrew tried to fight back, a public appearance here, a speech there. But the charm was gone. The mask had cracked. He stopped greeting people in the halls. He avoided eye contact in meetings. And once I caught him standing alone in the elevator, hands trembling slightly as the doors closed. For a man who built his reputation on control, losing it must have felt like drowning. And the worst part? I didn't feel sorry for him. Not anymore. Success didn't feel like I thought it would. There was no dramatic victory, no applause. Just silence, the quiet kind that comes when the noise finally dies down. I'd been promoted again, this time to lead the restructuring division. My reports went straight to the board. They trusted me, respected me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in my office, my new office, and think about how strange it all was. The same company that once discarded me had now rebuilt itself around my methods, my systems, my values. Andrew was still technically in charge, but he'd become a figurehead. His emails were short, his meetings infrequent. He was fading from the narrative, a ghost haunting the empire he no longer owned. And I was finally free. Or so I thought. Freedom, I learned, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet moment when you realize you no longer need to explain in yourself. I stopped thinking about revenge. Stopped dreaming about his downfall. Instead, I focused on growth, expanding Monroe strategies, mentoring women who'd been overlooked the way I once was. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. One morning, a headline flashed across my phone. Whitmore and Company faces major investor withdrawal. I read the article slowly, letting each sentence settle. It wasn't my doing. It was his. He'd approved a series of reckless expansions, trying to outshine my independent firm. It backfired, spectacularly. By the end of that quarter, half the board had resigned. The company was officially on the market for acquisition. And guess who the top bidder was? Monroe Strategies. The meeting was held in the same boardroom where I'd once been fired. Different faces now. Different tone. I walked in quietly, dressed in black, calm, professional, untouchable. Andrew sat at the far end of the table, pale and tense, flipping through papers that no longer mattered. For the first time, he looked small. When the vote passed, the company that bore his name, his pride, his proof of superiority, was officially sold. To me. He looked up as I signed the final page. Our eyes met one last time. You didn't end my career, I said quietly. You helped me start my empire. He didn't speak. He just looked at the papers, then at me, realization settling in like winter frost. And as I walked out of that room, I understood something deeply poetic. I hadn't destroyed him. He'd destroyed himself. I simply gave fate a front row seat. After the acquisition, the air in the building felt different. Quieter. Lighter. As if the walls themselves had been waiting for this moment to exhale. My name, Clara Monroe, now hung on the glass door that once bore his. A simple plaque, clean letters. It didn't need to shout. People congratulated me, of course. Articles called me the woman who rebuilt what she was once denied. But at night, when the noise faded, I sat alone in that corner office, the same one Andrew once occupied, and listened to the silence. Because that's the thing about revenge, it never sounds like you think it will. It's not fireworks. It's the echo of everything you survived. I kept a single item from the old company. An old framed quote that used to hang behind Andrew's chair. Fortune favors the bold. I'd seen him stare at it during meetings as if it were gospel. Back then, I thought it was arrogance. Now, I saw it differently. Fortune doesn't favor the bold. It favors the aware. The patient. The ones who bleed in silence, learn quietly, and strike with precision. Sometimes, boldness is just ego with a suit on. And ego always breaks first. Weeks turned into months. The company thrived. We rebuilt from the inside out, fair wages, real mentorship, integrity. Andrew's name disappeared from the headlines, from business circles, from relevance itself. He retired voluntarily, as the papers said. But I knew better. I saw him once more, by accident. A small cafe downtown. He was sitting alone, nursing a black coffee, wearing a coat that looked a little too big for him. Our eyes met for a brief second. No words. No anger. Just a quiet acknowledgement of what was lost and what was never coming back. He looked away first. And I realized that was the real ending. Some people think revenge means destroying someone else. But that's not it. The real revenge is evolution. It's turning pain into power, humiliation into hunger, and loss into legacy. When I mentor young women now, I tell them, don't chase payback. Build proof. Because one day, the same people who underestimated you will quote your work in boardrooms they no longer control. And that's where the poetry lives. I still walk past the old building sometimes. The one where it all began, where I was told I didn't fit the company's direction. It's been renovated now, polished and modern. But if you look closely, you can still see the faint outline of the old logo on the marble steps. That's life, isn't it? You can scrub the surface clean, but history leaves a shadow. My story started with humiliation and ended with quiet power. But the truth is, it was never about revenge. It was about becoming. So when people ask how I did it, how I went from fired to founder, I smile and say, I didn't fight the storm. I learned how to build in the rain.